I'd invite some of you law enforcement folks to kind of shuffle down into the municipal leader section, just so that way you have seats and can be at the table. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. We all agree that this is an important topic. So I'm Jessica Bickford. I'm the coordinator of Healthy Lamoille Valley. A lot of people know my name from Front Porch Forum. As you all know, adult use marijuana became legal on July 1st. And it's actually really important that we call it adult use. Recreation is what we're hearing a lot in our communities. And recreation is something that we've long encouraged our youth to participate in. Recreation is drama, it's dance, it's art, it's yoga, it's hiking. Those are all the things that are really healthy for youth bodies. And marijuana, we can all agree, is not something that we want to encourage youth to use. So we encourage you tonight to start changing that cultural norm and start using the word adult use or legalized marijuana. This marijuana legalization has potential impacts for all of us. And while we do not claim to have all the answers, there's a lot of gray areas still, tonight we come together as a community to workshop the impacts of marijuana legalization. We will look at our most recent Lamoille data, then we will review the law, and then we're going to break into table groups for discussions, which will be fueled by concern hats. Each of you has a hat on your table. You also have index cards and sticky notes. So as the evening goes on, we encourage you just to write down your thoughts, questions, concerns, and stick them in the hat. And then later, when we're doing community discussions, we'll be pulling those out of the hat and having those discussions. If you have broader questions, there's sticky notes around the room, big ones, and you can just kind of write things down on that. Let's see, lost my place. We'll then wrap up the evening having some report outs, and I want you each to think, what can you do to personally prevent youth use and the normalizing of marijuana? The handouts from tonight and the PowerPoints will be up on the Healthy Lamoille Valley website by the end of the day tomorrow, healthylamoillevalley.org. On each of your tables, there's NOMs, which are National Outcome Measures. And because we're grant funded to do this sort of work, I'd encourage you just to take one and fill it out. There's a box on the table and just leave it either on your table or put it in the box as you leave. The restrooms are in the back. There's some refreshments there. And then in the next week, we have your emails. We'll send out a 3 to 5 question, simple questionnaire via email, and that'll just help guide some of this future work. So be thinking as you fill that out, what are the impacts of this, and what do you need in your work? I'm now pleased to introduce Michelle Salvador, Substance Abuse Prevention and colleague with the Vermont Department of Health, Morrisville District. Michelle has been doing substance abuse prevention work for around 20 years in this region. She also loves to camp and kayak and canoe, and she also loves to sit and watch her son's baseball games. But tonight she's here with her work hat, and she's passionate about preventing youth substance abuse.
Thanks, Jessica. Unfortunately, he didn't make it to the championship game tonight, but fortunately, I'm able to be here, and it's great to see all of you here. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the implications for prevention of legalization of marijuana. And I want to start by sharing a few stories with you about my experiences of raising a child in Vermont in this day and age. So at 4 years old, the messages started to my son, maybe earlier than 4 years old, but at 4 years old, he got offered his own special drinks. My mother came one time on a camping trip and referred to him as his own special cocktail. By 5 years old, my son had started skiing at 2 years old. By 5, he was quite good. And one Saturday, we headed off to the ski mountain. And when we arrived, we ran into this character on skis that looked like a giant, someone in a costume, like a giant Sam Adams costume. And what they did is they gave us this map to the mountain. All the trails are named after beers. And they gave us this pass that we could wear that you could, if you found all the Sam Adams guys on the mountain, you could get it punched to get some prizes at the end. So the prizes were things like a Sam Adams hat and a Sam Adams thing to wrap around your skis and a chapstick and a thermometer, I guess, in case you had drank too much that you weren't sure exactly how cold it was outside. And then you could head up to the tavern afterwards, which was open to all families, and you could sample your Sam Adams beer. You could get your picture taken, which they later uploaded to the Sam Adams website that you could go and share with all your friends online. By 6 years old, my son had noticed all of messaging around him. And he's particularly musically inclined, and he would start singing songs he heard, and one in particular was a song about Corona, and this tune stuck with him for quite some time. So by 8 years old, we were going every Saturday in the summertime after baseball season to the farmer's market in Montpelier, and I thought he really liked maple soda because he would beg me for this like $4 maple soda every week. Until this one day, he was walking around and he had finished drinking it. And I said, well, let's go find the barrel to recycle it. And he said, oh no, Mama. I look cool. I look like I've got a beer. And keep in mind, his mother is a prevention consultant. I was completely horrified. So by 10 years old, isn't he cute? So by 10 years old, he reached the end of his baseball season this year before the All-Stars, and a couple of the parents got together and they decided they were going to take up a collection to buy some gifts for the kids to give to the coaches. So they bought beer mugs with the coach's name on it, and then a bunch of emails went around about pitching in to buy some special beverages for the children to give to the coaches to go with the beer. Needless to say, I didn't make many friends that day. So this is last weekend, and there are more and more messages that my son and all of our children have been bombarded with growing up here in Vermont. This is last weekend at the Montpelier's Farmers Market, and if you'll take some note, there are actually some children sitting at the back of the table. And then this was later that day came up in my Facebook feed. This was posted by Montpelier Alive. Apparently, a lot of the cannabis that was being given away on this table had disappeared. And the caption was only in Montpelier. And it had 305 likes by that afternoon. And it got shared 145 times. And some of the comments that were made under it were like, oh my God, so funny, so funny. This is so great. Vermont, the Green Mountains are so great. So this is the kind of messaging in our communities and access and availability of these substances and norming of their use in our community are all the risk factors that have a significant impact on our young people. And it has an impact on what is the first age that they start using these substances. So despite our varying opinions and beliefs, in this room about our two most prevalent substances of misuse in Vermont, both alcohol and marijuana, there's one thing I bet that we all have in common. And that is that I'm sure that we all want youth to be able to grow up in our communities and have opportunities to grow up in the healthiest environment possible. So let's take a look at how our youth are doing right here in Lamoille, okay? So these are the percentage of adolescents in grade 9 to 12 who drank any alcohol in the past 30 days. This is from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is one of the most validated health surveys in existence. We've been giving it since the early 90s. And all of our stats across the board since the early 90s, contrary to sometimes to what you hear in the news, have been decreasing. The trend has been going downward until this last year. For the first time here, we're seeing a significant increase here in our rates of young people who are drinking alcohol in the past 30 days. And the same we found, this data just came out a couple weeks ago, the same we're finding with marijuana, rates starting to kind of creep upward. And when I look at this data, I think about what is the culture that we're living in right now. We're living in that culture where our young people are having constant alcohol messaging. We're living in a culture now where our young people are getting a lot of messaging and a lot of mixed messaging about substances like alcohol and marijuana. So there's some additional data I want to share that just jumps out and slaps me in the face. And this is the data of the age with which young people first begin using, okay? This is the only one I'm looking at here. Drank before the age of 13. Lamoille is at 20%. 20% of our young people are drinking before the age of 13 compared to 14% in the rest of the state. We are worse than the rest of the state. And the reason why this number is so concerning is the reason why we do substance abuse prevention. Because we know, science shows us, that young people that begin using before the age of 15 are 6 times more likely to develop dependency in their lives to chemicals than someone who waits till age 21 or later to begin using. Because the brain is not done cooking yet at that age. It takes until 25 for that to happen. So when you're introducing these substances to young people's brains, those neural connections, those important neural connections for their health are not happening, okay? You ask, I say to Lisa and everyone, you ask anybody, that you know has substance use disorder, when did they first begin using? And I guarantee you 99.9% of them will say it was before the age of 15. And here are our rates in Lamoille on percent of students, grades 9 to 12, using marijuana before the age 13. Again, worse than the rest of the state. 9% as compared to 16%. So more than the state average, we're more than the state average, and Debbie's going to share with us as well some information that's really concerning that correlates to this around our rates. Lamoille is an anomaly, and we have the highest rates of youth suicide in the entire state. So as we're having these conversations, it's important for us to be thinking about the messaging in our communities. I want to come back to this data for a minute just to kind of recap, okay? So here are our rates over the years, alcohol and marijuana going down, all of a sudden going up, marijuana. Now you'll see cigarettes is going down. The one thing I do want to point out, though, is that young people are vaping at very high rates. That data has increased, okay? That is not the same as cigarettes. I just want to point that out because that is not on this chart. So when young people get positive messages about using substances in their communities, and when substances are easily available and accessible, we see that their perception of how harmful a substance is goes down. And when they don't perceive that a substance is harmful, their use rates go up, okay? Now this is the percent parental disapproval of alcohol, marijuana, and cigarettes. So these are the young people that said, my parents think it's wrong or very wrong for me to use these substances. And you'll see that while the use rates, that's hard to say, went up, parents disapproving is going down, okay? So when use rates go down among youth, we see that they believe that their parents disapprove of use. When their use rates go up, they don't believe, am I saying that the right way? They don't believe that as many parents disapprove of them using. So the way that we prevent substance misuse in our communities is by addressing each of these areas in this prevention model. So with the legalization and the increasing use messages that young people are getting in our communities, we really need to examine how we are addressing prevention in each of these areas so that we can begin to reverse the trends, those increasing trends that we're really starting to see here in Lamoille. So I'm going to turn it over at this point to Debbie Haskins. I've known Debbie Haskins for a very, very long time, longer than 20 years, I'm sure. And she is a licensed drug and alcohol counselor. She basically created the Student Assistance Professionals organization in the state and has spent years being a student assistance counselor herself. She has coached many youth. She's very passionate about the health of our young people in Vermont. And she just recently worked with us to go all around our county to educate parents and students around vaping, this recent issue of vaping. And when Debbie's done, we're going to break up into our table groups and we're going to have the opportunity to discuss some of what you heard today. So be thinking about your hats and your questions, any concerns or thoughts that come up, and put those in the hats while you're listening to Debbie.
So I, too, want to thank you all for being here. I am always amazed when I come to Lamoille how many people come and want to have this discussion. I just want to make a full disclosure. Tonight, I'm actually representing someone else. Steve Waldo went on a journey, and I can't even begin to tell you. I'm filling some pretty big shoes tonight as a former liquor inspector. He would have been here tonight, but nearly died. And he said to me, I'll send you my presentation and you can fit into my shoes. And actually, I can't, because he has some expertise that you as law enforcement have that I don't have. So I'm so glad to see you here tonight. As a licensed drug and alcohol counselor, I want you to think about a few things. I've worked with kids for 30 years. I've heard everything there is to hear. I also still have a private practice. Full disclosure, up until 3 years ago, I worked for an organization and volunteered my time for 3 years because I did not want to see marijuana legal. Because of this discussion tonight, there's too many unanswered questions. So I have to say that. And I think you're going to walk away with some questions thinking, oh my God, we need to figure out some things. And I hope that's true. I hope we figure out these things. This is a very potent, powerful drug. Make no mistake about it. And we're going to need to figure out what we've just done with our state. And some people think it's funny, and some people think it's about money. You need to know my other job. I'm a suicide prevention specialist, and I work with schools and communities when a student has died. And I'm going to show you one slide that is incredibly, to me, powerful about what we've just opened the door for. I want you to think about a question that Michelle said a moment ago. When we talk about age of first use, how many of you have children in here? Please raise your hand. How many of you have grandchildren, nieces, nephews? This is about adult use, and it's about kids. And when you think of kids, what age do you want them to start using? Well, we need to ask ourselves that, because when Michelle talks about what we do and how we act as adults, the day before this law, in June, I was in a school building, and kids couldn't wait to become legal because they thought it meant that they were going to have access to it. And they're right, because they told me how. So let's dive into some of this. What I hope happens is that first you understand what we're even talking about. And I'm not asking a personal question here, but I can't go into the men's bathroom. But in the women's bathroom, there's a plaque up. And it says think. And the first word on that think says truthful. Truthful. Do not text, do not talk, do not give information that is not truthful. So when I think of marijuana, it is all over the place about non-truths, lies, misinformation. So we need to look at the data. We need to look at science and research about what we know. This is not a miracle drug. It has some benefits, the plant itself, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. How can we protect our youth, our young adults, and our older adults who also have begun to think that it's safe? What are the devices? I talked to a state trooper this morning. I said, what in God's name is hash in this bill for? Hash. 30 years, last 20 years, none of my clients have used hash. They smoke, they eat, they vape, they don't use hash. I think some people are out of touch, and I think that we're going to have a conversation tonight about what we are seeing when we talk about these drugs and how youth and young adults, 20-somethings, are using marijuana. And so this was this week's Jeff Danziger's political cartoon, and for those of you that can't see it, this is a joint. And it says, suggested new design for series on top of Capitol Dome, which for those of you that know, our dome is being repaired. A lot of people would like to call some of our highways and make jokes about this. It isn't funny to me. It sends a message. It says something about our state, about how we see it. I'm born and raised in Vermont. 4 generations, Native American. I've got some feeling about this, and I'm real passionate about our kids because they make choices based at looking at what you do every day. And our data shows it. Our data is starting to show it. So let's talk about this drug that we're talking about. In a moment, we're going to talk about the law. We are talking about a plant that grows. And 20 or 30 years ago, it would have been ditchweed. It would have been $5, $10 for an ounce. It would grow. It would have no THC in it. It would be nothing. You could smoke it all day. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, it's a little hybrid product, and it's been learned that there are chemicals in it that are actually helpful, but they have to be extracted. And one of them that needs to be extracted is CBD. Now, I have to tell you, everywhere I go, I see CBD. I see it in the grocery store. I see it in Willie's in Greensboro. I see it in Calais. It is not CBD. It's what people are marketing as CBD because there's a process involved in this. It has to be extracted. We know that there are chemicals in this plant that grow that are helpful for pain, but it hasn't gone through the FDA process totally, and we need to find out what that is. So my first concern is how many people are buying CBD oil? How many of you, and you don't have to raise your hand, but think about this. How many people do you know that have talked to you about CBD oil, know about it, know about where they can get it? Anybody in here? Put your hand up if you feel comfortable doing that. You wouldn't have heard that before 5 years ago. Now it's commonplace. My question is, what's in it? We want to ask ourselves what's in things that we use. Vaping. So let's talk about this. The law says you can have 1 ounce. That's what an ounce looks like. The law says that you can have 5 grams of hash, which would be equal to about this battery right here. Yet most youth, college age, and 20-somethings are not smoking and rolling a joint. They are eating edibles. They are vaping. Our kids went to vape quite some time ago. They started out with these pretty heavy, clunky things that can be bought everywhere. They got smaller as the market changed. And every school in the state of Vermont saw these. What are these? Juuling. What a clever product. Just plug it into, USB port, let it get charged, you inhale, you deliver a little bit of smoke, nobody can tell. Kids know that it's discreet. The industry knew that it's discreet. However, Canada has decided to do even one better. Now they're sending out dose pens. Dose pens are a pen with already pre-measured 200 hits of marijuana for easy consumption, for easy hiding, that are going to be found and have been found in nearly every single school. I spent not just in Lamoille County, but this last year, high schools were calling concerned because of what they were seeing kids using. Now, in some of the pens, kids were using flavored nicotine, incredibly harmful, and in some pens, they were using liquid THC, an extraction, which is not in this law at all. It's not talked about at all. There are hookah pens that are made specifically for this. There are e-cigarettes, vape. All of these are designed and can be bought at most every single store here in your county and around the state. They're not hard to get. And if you don't want to go to the store, you can easily go, in fact, online and order anything. But it's not about smoking. Within 5 years, no one will smoke this product. It will be edibles. It will be concentrates. It will be candy, gummy bears, food, all of that. And my point in that is, how are we going to regulate it? Those are the questions we want to have at our tables tonight. How are we going to do what we need to do to protect our youth and our young people, and also to allow adults to do? And there's some concern that I have with this drug and what it's going to do. These are the dose pens, pre-measured, filled with marijuana. You get done with them, you throw them away. If anybody knows the answer to this question, I want you to think about it. What is cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, or CHS? If you know, wait, we're going to talk about it at the end. It's a syndrome that our kids are showing up at ER with now. So we've opened the doors. You saw farmers market, which actually I missed. I was at the farmers market, but I missed the marijuana that was there being given away free. That's not supposed to happen, but let's talk about what the law does. It eliminated penalties for adults, and I want to thank Jessica for talking about that awful word that I will not use. It's called the R word, and that's recreational. Our kids don't do most drugs recreational. They do them to get drunk, to get high, to get wasted. They're not doing it to sit around and sip the great IBA beer or to enjoy a joint. They're using it to get high. They're using it to change how they feel. The earlier, and I want to repeat that, the earlier a youth uses, and I've rarely had a client in 30 years come to see me who has not started using at an age of 13 or younger and uses multiple substances. They often show up in my office in their 40s and 50s because the law enforcement have gotten them for a DUI. And that is sometimes 30 years, 20 years, 15 years of drinking, driving, and now perhaps drugging and driving. So we have some questions that we need to figure out. The General Assembly wants people, adults, to have 1 ounce. And by the way, street value of marijuana at the end of this last year was anywhere from $200 to $300 for that 1 ounce. I don't know if you guys have a different price, but that's what our kids were telling me. Anywhere from $200 to $300 for that ounce. Now, for an adult, that might not be a big deal. For a kid, they're either pooling or selling. It's a big deal in a school to have 1 ounce because you're getting rid of it some way. 4 plants, 2 mature plants, 4 immature plants. Somebody tell me, what do the 4 immature plants do at that certain period of time? They become what? Mature. So then how many plants do I have? I now have 6 mature plants that I need to store somewhere. Anybody know how much a plant can produce? Can. So I could have potentially 6 pounds. I could have less. Depends if I grow it. Depends if it, and it's supposed to be grown indoors, out of sight, locked up, so youth can't get it. These are lies. It is not legal to sell it. And I'm going to show you one of my last slides. It doesn't make any difference if it's legal. There's ways around it. DUI for marijuana has been properly defined. We know that that's not true. There is no per se limit. There is no research yet that shows. They're going to be doing several studies. They are doing several studies about what is the limit. You see, marijuana doesn't stay in your system at all. It's a plant. The tetrahydrocannabinol, the active ingredient that gets you high, stays in your system. And it's a fatty drug. It's not like alcohol that you pee out, you sweat out, it goes out through your system. It takes time for that to leave your system. But marijuana is a fatty drug. A fatty drug. And this is one of the fattiest organs we have, along with our liver, along with our other body organs and our. So it stays saturated. So if I'm a daily user, a weekly user, put the question back in, then what we find is that it stays in the system. It impacts the behavior. Am I high? Do I feel high? Well, we don't know yet. And just like alcohol affects different people, and affects women differently than men, and it affects Native Americans differently and Asians differently, so too will marijuana. Everyone in this room will be impacted differently. Smoking weed in the park is okay. True? Not true. Not true. You cannot smoke anywhere that you cannot smoke tobacco products. You cannot smoke. You're not supposed to vape. It was interesting because I was in the State House the day this bill was being talked about, and I went down, went across the lawn, went by the Department of Motor Vehicles where my car was parked with my ticket on it that I always get, and there was a gentleman vaping in public on the main street, which he's not supposed to do. And I'm thinking, so he's using tobacco. How are we going to stop marijuana? It's a civil. Weed is good for you. No, marijuana has chemicals in it that may be, with research, be shown to be fairly helpful in certain things. And the research is different, meaning I've seen lots of research that a post-traumatic stress disorder is not a diagnosis that should be smoking marijuana. And yet I've read studies that say it is. So that tells me one thing. We're not clear yet. We have a long ways to go about whether what's good or not. So this is what is true. You can have an ounce. By the way, you can't have it in a car, not unless it's locked. You can have those 2 mature plants, those 4 immature plants. Everything else is still illegal. There's a lot of questions that you're going to be asking at your table. A person cannot consume in a park, a street, an alley, an alleyway, at an event. So had someone been at the farmer's market smoking, that would have been illegal. The question is, who do you call? Who do you call? What will it be? Any place that a tobacco product is not supposed to be. And of course, school is an obvious. It's not supposed to be at high school, middle school, elementary school, college at all, nor is vaping. This is still a federally illegal drug. Schools receive federal monies, so they cannot allow it on campus. And many schools, I don't recall if this one has a sign, many schools actually have signs that talk about that, no vaping. It's a great conversation to let you know that no one, adult or youth, that walks in here can do it. This is what marijuana looks like all pre. For those of you that are sitting here and think, well, I'm going to grow some, or I've grown some and I roll it, people don't do that too much anymore. They smoke it in a pipe. They make butane hash oil. They make different products with it. They don't even bother with any of that. They order a lot of this stuff online. Or they go, as one of my clients says, I'm not going to bother with any of this. I'm just going to go to who I always get it from. Nothing's going to change for me. This makes it easy and available for our youth, for our young adults. If you're under 21, there are some civil penalties if you get picked up with it. You get referred to diversion. You can be older than 21 and be referred to diversion, by the way. There's a fine. You can possibly have your driver's license suspended. And if you continue, in other words, you go around and get your second offense, it's going to be longer. Of course, if you don't have a driver's license, there is no penalty there. And it needs to be followed. And the question is, will diversion follow that through ages? If you own a dwelling and you rent, it is really clear that there's some things that you can't do. If I am a landlord, I can choose to not allow anyone in my building, which is a great thing, to grow or to use. But I need to make it written. If they want to grow, they need to get my permission as a landlord, and I can say no. If I'm a Section 8 housing, I don't have to allow it at all. None of this has been through courts systems, so we have a lot of conversation about this yet. It's very well defined around a couple things, meaning one dwelling, 2 plants, 4 plants, ounce per. Doesn't make any difference. We're in Johnson. We got 6 boys that are, I used to teach at Johnson, and they would be rooming together. That doesn't mean that they can have 36 plants. That means exactly that, a dwelling. But they are renting, so they would need permission. So if you're a landlord or you know of someone, this is going to be a conversation that you might want to have. We actually have some policies and some information tonight on that. True or false? I said this earlier. Marijuana stays in the blood. No. 73% of it stays in the brain and other tissues. The THC. That's important because of, I'm going to drive home tonight. And you had an event a couple week ago, where possibly, in fact, I would guess somebody probably smoked because I saw the picture on the front page of the paper. They are impaired when they get in the car. It stays in their system, most of it, for quite some time. And the question then becomes is, how will we deal with impairment on the road? The same way we deal with impairment of alcohol on the road. Impairment is impairment. I said earlier, one of my other jobs is working as a suicide prevention consultant. I go into communities when someone has taken their own life. This statistic from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey by John Searles, who's a double PhD, when I think about truthful and I think about information, I trust no one like I trust John Searles, because he will tell you if it's bogus. Because he knows about research. That's his life. There's a correlation. For a youth that begins to use not only early and often, they are more likely. So the folks on the right here who are using marijuana are 21% more likely to have made a suicide plan than the folks on the right who have had no marijuana use. So it's double. Let me just say something about our youth. Our youth answer a question on the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. And the question is, are you sad? Are you feeling hopeless? Have you felt sad or hopeless for 2 weeks or more? These are clinical definitions for depression. We have a high number of youth here in Vermont, because I'm familiar with Vermont data, that are clinically depressed. When they get in touch with this drug, it exacerbates not only their depression and possible suicide ideation, but it also makes them more vulnerable to other substances. I worry about that. So when I think of Michelle's slide about the children using more, I think about how are the children? How are the children going to be in 3 years from now? How are our middle school kids who at 13 are in 7th or 8th grade? How are they going to be with their anxiety? Anxiety and depression are the 2 disorders that most of our youth have, and oftentimes exacerbated with substances. What to believe, what not to believe. There is a lot of media out there that wants us to believe that marijuana is the cure-all for all kinds of things. I would caution you to think about the research behind that and what does that really mean. What are we talking about? When someone asks you and tells you a statistic about marijuana, and a young person, I was doing a presentation, and he said, how do you know that's true? I said, well, last night I was reading the Center for Disease Control, the Journal of American Medical Association, the Department of Health, Harvard's latest research. That's where I get my information, not High Times, not my best friends that are smoking, not the person that's giving it to me, because kids don't need to sell this stuff. Neither do adults. They gift it. So you saw, and in just a moment you're going to get to talk at your table, you saw that it is illegal to sell it, did you not? So I decided, after talking to a couple people, to see how's Craigslist doing with that. So here it is, as of July 1st. The finest medical grade cannabis, notice not marijuana, we're using the word cannabis to make it sound different, delivered to your Vermont home, office, or alternative location, 21 and over only. This 100% natural product, it's a medicine, is craft grown in Vermont. The smell, taste, and potency profiles are connoisseur grade, whatever that means. Product is properly cured, not sure, and expertly trimmed. The flower strains currently available are Cherry Garcia, Village Green, Vermont OG. There is no charge for the cannabis. None. Zip. It is gifted to the people who find cannabis relieves their symptoms. 1/4 ounce, 1/2 ounce, and 1 ounce are available, but there's a delivery fee. If you'd like the small package, it's $150, the medium $200, and $300 respectively. I personally deliver your product. I am an educated, clean-cut, reliable, discreet. I am knowledgeable and can answer any questions you have. I deliver statewide. Your product comes discreetly and elegantly packaged in Vermont. An ounce or less is fully legal, not if you're underage. And if you give it to someone underage, you will see at your table a schematic that talks about what happens to you about that. You can be arrested. Please email me with your first name, your town, your strain, your amount, how much you want, your contact, thanks, and be well. I end with that because the law went into July 1st. The law goes into effect. This guy's got it grown and ready to go out the door July 2nd. We're not going to stop that. Where do you think some of that might end up? Certainly there will be people that will choose not to grow it, and that's perfectly fine if you're an adult. But my concern is what we're going to talk about at our tables. When we think about this drug, how it will impact your community, will your community, whether it be this one or Eden or one of the smaller ones, or where I live in Calais, will we allow growers to come in? Will it be able to be sold at farmers market? Can they sell it at my 3 stores? Can it be sold at the home market, which sells vegetables, where kids are at? How will this impact our driving? How will this impact our school? Do we want our bus drivers? Do we want our police officers token up on the weekends? Do we want our doctors on their own time using edibles, which are far more potent and last longer and can cause psychosis? I do a lot of trainings. I didn't even talk about all the other things that marijuana can do to anyone's brain. While I have been concerned about youth, I'm also concerned about adults. I'm concerned about what parents will be allowed. And by the way, if you are a child care facility, you cannot grow it. You cannot smoke it. That's a great thing. If you're an after-school program, you cannot grow it. You cannot smoke it. If you're not registered with the state of Vermont as a child care, they have to tell you if they're going to smoke it. The question I have for you at your tables, whatever you're talking about, is how will we enforce this? How will we know both that our youth are safe and that we're safe whether we're educators in schools. Schools have policies. And all schools have had to revamp their policy, not only for youth, but for adults. Can adults use on weekends? Can teachers smoke on the weekends? Can firefighters smoke on the weekends? Can the nurses who work really hard smoke on the weekend? Can our legislators smoke on the weekend? How will we know? What will that mean? So I want to stop right now, and I want you at your table, if you haven't turned your hat over, I want you to start thinking about whether you're youth or family or police or you just have a question. I want you to start putting those questions in the hat and talk about that at your table. What are your concerns?
And we'll give you one other set of directions. We'd like you to go around and introduce yourself to the people at your table, who you are, why you're here tonight, and then review the concerns in your hat. If there are no concerns, ask each other what are your thoughts on what you've heard tonight. And choose a facilitator at each table. We have some extra questions here. And then towards the end of the time, ask participants what are one thing that you can do with this information after participating in this event. And then also remember that you have some noms on your table to fill out as well. So thank you, and we can start.
So I wanted to, and I don't always do this, but I wanted to make sure CHS is chronic. It causes nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain. People end up in emergency rooms with it. It's from smoking daily because it's such a high concentrate of smoking or eating, and the only way to deal with it is to stop using it. So if you knew what that was, this is what's showing up in emergency rooms and some other illnesses as well. We'd like to know what you talked about at your table, what kinds of things. So hopefully you have a reporter who is going to talk about some of the things and record what you either talked about or themes or even questions. And maybe we'll be able to help you with those, and maybe they'll just remain big questions. Who would like to go first? Yes?
So I guess it's two of the questions that I had. One was I asked the legislators before they left. Two are tried to sneak out. So I was just curious on their deal. Knowing that with all these studies, how come they voted yes to basically this without having more of a study done? But I also asked them both if they had land, and if this does become legal, are they going to start making production on their own? So he didn't like that. He was very upset, it appears, but I was just curious. So the other question that I have is, we do a lot of studies that sit there and say, okay, how many of the kids are doing this? Okay, how many studies are we doing to ask them, why are you doing this? So we have a lot of numbers that show everything, but.
Yep. And I'm not going to try to answer that question because it's a broad question. I will say that we are doing some things within schools and communities about looking at assets, about changing. We do know some of the reasons around anxiety and depression, and we were just talking about with the doctors at one table as well. Is one of the things about what we're talking about, and this is true for all of us probably, is when we feel anxious or stressed or uncomfortable, many people don't like that feeling. They try to do something about getting away from that feeling. Now, sometimes people eat, sometimes they run to exercise, and sometimes they use drugs. That's a way to manage. Anxiety and depression are the two disorders that our kids have at a very young age. So we really do need to teach not only our kids, but our adults, our families, about how to deal with some of our emotions. As I often tell youth and adults, emotions don't kill. What you do about it does. What you do about it does. Learning to be uncomfortable is part of life. Learning to deal when things aren't going well is a part of life. If every time I reach for something, whether it be a drug or food or shop, whatever, then I'm reinforcing that. And so figuring out how we feel and being comfortable enough to live with that I think is a huge thing that we could do. And 4 governors ago, I gave him a plan about how to do that. He didn't like it either, so.
So the answer
There are
that
some
he gave
answers.
me about how come though he voted yes was he used the example of cigarettes. It's easier just not to fight it.
Wow, it's easier not to fight.
So
Wow. I think our kids and families are worth more than that, but that's my experience. Yes?
Can I respond to cigarettes?
Cigarettes, and then we're gonna have conversations, so.
Well, I mean, I think what happened with cigarettes is that Philip Morris was convicted, those companies were convicted of racketeering, and they were actually plotting to make addicts, because addicts are their profit center.
right.
And so they did that behind closed doors, and there was a whole racketeering. And so when they were convicted, then they said, no, we want to settle. And the settlement was, what, $360 million? And that money, when you funnel it into somebody like Debbie, who's got a lot of expertise in prevention, we can get rid of addiction in Vermont if we want to. It's just a matter of will. I mean, Ison's shown you how to do it.
Right. So that's
It's
kind of like
choice.
saying though
Well-
too, like basically marijuana.
Right.
Okay, it's
And I would
pure
just-
because I grew it, but how many people on basically the streets are getting marijuana that's not truly laced with something or sprayed with some kind
Exactly.
of
I
synthetic?
didn't talk about
So,
fentanyl. I didn't
yes.
talk about all the things that we said.
Right. So you're technically never ever going to get rid of it. You know, I hate to say it. You can say you can get rid of it, but the reality of it is you never are.
It's
So-
3%, not 3.
Yeah, I'm just
Well,
throwing it out.
and I, again, there's a lot of statistics. If you follow the money, I have another whole total presentation. The alcohol industry and the tobacco industry are right at the doorsteps wanting to produce this product. So,
What about the pharmaceutical industry?
pharmaceutical is
What
also.
about depression and anxiety that is routinely treated in the psychiatric community with drugs that have far worse side effects
You're absolutely right.
than cannabis? And it's routinely
Well-
done, and, well, we don't know.
Chip, I wouldn't agree with that last statement. I would agree with the first part of your statement.
Okay.
I absolutely agree that there are alternatives to dealing. In fact, there's a woman down in the southern part of the state who runs a facility that uses no medication whatsoever.
That would be great.
And one of the reasons it's not so powerful, meaning it's not taken across the state, is because the insurance companies won't pay for it, because she does alternative medications, meaning no medication. It's what I was talking about: yoga, swimming, acupuncture, massage, all the alternative ways to deal with the human body that every culture knows but ours, is that medication is only one. I would disagree wholeheartedly with your statement that this is less of a danger of a drug when I've seen a kid die from it. So I think that we have to be careful about, and this is how this rumor gets started, is that somehow one drug is less than the other. It doesn't get put into your arm, but it can cause psychosis and a psychotic break and mental illness long-term for a segment of the population. And I'm not willing to risk that on the kids that I know, my kid or yours.
Do you have statistics that would
Absolutely.
suggest to this group that no one has ever overdosed on antidepressants?
No,
Well,
it's not about overdose. This is
you just
much
mentioned
bigger.
someone who overdosed from marijuana.
He didn't overdose
Or
with marijuana.
committed suicide.
He didn't commit. He took his own life. There's a difference.
Okay.
When you take your life, and I want to go back to the rest of the group and how they talk. When you talk about what drugs do, they change the chemicals in the brain.
That's correct.
Whether it's cannabis, whether it's actually not just substances you ingest, gambling, internet, sex,
Combat.
shopping, combat. There's lots of things that change the way our brain functions. And everybody needs something different in their brain.
Absolutely.
And some people actually have to be locked up to be kept safe. Okay? Because we have people that the only place we can keep them is either in jail or in a psychiatric facility. All I want this group tonight to know is that this is not a passive drug. It's a very dangerous drug, in particular to our young adults, not just in school, our 20-somethings, our 30-somethings. You tell me one parent that's going to benefit from getting stoned night after night if they're going to be a better parent. I'm worried about our kids and the parenting that's going to occur. But let's go back and hear what you were worried about. And Chip, I'll talk with you later afterwards, okay? Who else? What did you talk about at your table? What questions came up?
So we had a couple, one of my thoughts was about support groups for kids and the direction of the conversation that can happen in schools. If there are, my dad was a big part of care for a long time.
Yep.
If that's still around, or if there's something like it, or if, my other thought was if there's a room in every school that every day is open for this conversation. And then also just thinking forward about making this conversation less about telling kids to stop and don't, and making it negative, and maybe changing the direction to a constructive forward movement with the conversation. So is it good for you? And discuss what's good for you. And if things aren't good for you, then why are you putting it in your body? And maybe they'll be less resistant to that conversation and less resistant to the whole topic in general. They won't fight in that direction.
So I'm going to answer your first question you asked. There's a group here, and most schools have it, about youth coming together to look at assets, to look at changes, to look at positive things. And that's true across the state. Is it absolute in all schools? Absolutely not. There used to be a person and a room in every single school when Governor Douglas was here. And our next governor came in and he stroked those all out because prevention wasn't what he wanted to see. So we took all those out. Those prevention people in school who worked with the school nurses, who became part of a team to help kids and support them for any reason. And we saw our numbers change. So when we look at what works, and we found that DARE actually, part of it didn't work. So we looked at the data and we figured out what does work. We do know how prevention works and how we can make a change. Part of it is in schools. But that's not where it can change totally. Because we need to help parents, like you folks tonight, and communities understand this isn't just about the teachers teaching more. I worked with teachers for 30 years, and you know what they tell me, health educators? I want to talk about mental health issues and substance abuse issues with my kids. I want to talk to them about where they're at. I don't have time in my curriculum to do it. So we need to do some changing. As they say to me all the time, you know, Debbie, if that was graded like math is and science, if mental health was graded, we would have the time. So we need to do some things differently, in my opinion, from hearing from the teachers. I think all of yours are great ideas. I think kids need support. I think families need support. I think this is confusing, what we've just done. I think it's confusing when we don't look at the research. I think it's confusing when we have all of these things that kind of go across the way. I think it's confusing when we get medication that isn't working. And yet we prescribe it anyways. So I think you're on the right track. I think we have to figure out how we can get there. And that's what tonight is about. Yes?
Well, we didn't really talk about this at my table, but I was just thinking on the lines of school. You must be familiar with what they do in Scout, and I don't remember what it's called, but is there a benefit? Has there been a proven benefit to, you know, when they put on the little skits and
We asked about DARE. What we
Yeah.
evidence-based
oh, that's what it's
program
called.
happening in the
Okay.
school.
Yeah.
We didn't.
Do you want to answer that, Jeff?
Yeah, I'll answer
Yeah.
that question.
Yeah, I know,
work
I
closely,
know,
so
yeah,
I mean, I know the answer, but I think
So one of the things that Helping Lamoille Valley does is we support these student groups in a lot of our schools. The group in Stowe is called Growing Up Stowe, and the students, there's Make a Difference Stowe and Build Our Stowe Schools. So the MADS group and the BOSS group. And they came together and they presented the data, and then they made a plan as to what their school community could do. And we're replicating that in most of the schools in our region, and those that we're not in, we're finding ways to continually bring it up every year and say, how can we start this work? So Lamoille Middle has a group, Peoples Middle and High School, Stowe Middle and High School, Craftsbury Middle School. Those schools have groups. There's been a change in staff at Hazen, so we're working to get back in there this year. So a lot of the schools do have these groups, and when student voice, they bring the data and they bring a plan, it's received so much better because we all react when we hear students sharing, and it's really powerful. So any opportunities, even if you have neighbors or friends, just ask the kids, what are you seeing? And how can we support you? We took a group of students down to DC this year, and with the Sheriff's Department, and I know that Roger has made a commitment to continue to work with students. So that's another opportunity that students can get involved, is through the Lamoille Area Youth Leadership Team. So there's lots of opportunities.
So can I kind of add to that with the looking over my kids here? So my other thought with that, like forward progress with kids too, is there's a lot of statistics about how many kids use this and how many kids use that, and it's kind of depressing statistic. So I wondered about surveys about how many kids don't, how many parents don't.
It's there.
There.
Always there. It's just that
Because
the
those
folks.
should be seen just as much because they're not.
We call it social norming. If 8 out of 10, and the tobacco industry did a great job with this, 8 out of 10 kids do not smoke.
Yeah.
And it was a huge campaign to help normalize, and this is true for when we talk to students and they talk to each other, and they talk to faculty about how can we flip that data. And there's a whole bunch of assets that are charted in the youth risk behavior survey about, it was interesting because I was part of listening to some of what these kids were talking about. They wanted what you talked about in their school. They wanted more groups, they wanted more places, they wanted more information, they wanted more involvement. The kids always say that they want more. It's fascinating.
And they talk about suicide.
And they talked about suicide too. Yes. So we'll go here, and then I know you have your hand up. Yes.
Just respond to you. So I'm still a parent, and I'm on part of so, and for us as parents, it's been an uphill battle because the Stowe school system has been infiltrated with a lot of kids that are just juuling and vaping and smoking, and it's been a really uphill battle with us. But we're growing and we're trying to educate the kids. But what we do need for the parents and Stowe is to basically, come together and talk to your kids and not resist, not talking to them because it's taboo or it's frowned upon, but actually communicating with them because there are kids that are out there that are depressed and then look to these devices to get some type of relief. And I talk to my kids on making good choices, but I know they get peer pressure. So how to deal with that peer pressure, how to say no to that, how to, yes, potentially be the outsider when several of your colleagues or your friends are doing something that you don't agree with. It's rough out there. Plus getting all the exams in and meeting all the grades and everything that you have to do with that. They turn to these devices. And so that's where we have to come together and reinforce and say, what are you doing that worked for you that maybe is not working for me? And so we get together in small groups and talk about it. The bigger we are as parents and the stronger that we are together, I think that our kids will probably flourish and follow suit and battle that peer pressure and all those things that are coming down.
And I want to say something before we go to this gentleman here is, this community did something a lot of communities did, along with help with Jessica and Michelle, is they filled an auditorium with parents because it became mandatory for coaches and kids to show up and hear the conversation about vaping. And I did 2 hours, and there were some parents there in the conversation. So the question begins, how do we get the information out? That's one way. It's not the only way. But it's about bringing people together. And so if you're sitting here thinking there's nothing you can do, I disagree with that. It all starts with one person being vocal. And it was, you saw me the first time, so I want her to come back. Whether it's me or someone else, it's about, I can make a difference. I want to keep my kids safe. I'm going to find out who are the kids and the parents that can work with me, who are the law enforcement, who are my nurses, who can I get and wrap around? Because we can make a difference. I don't think this is hopeless, because then we're writing our kids off.
Hi, I'm Mike.
Hi, Mike. You guys talk about it. What do you want?
I just wanted to add to the conversation. I think that school programs are great and it's good for prevention, but my theory on the whole thing, that accessibility and marketing are going to be the two main things that our youth look at. I have 2 teenagers, and I try to guide them the best I can, but I can be honest, sometimes they make poor decisions.
Absolutely.
And I can tell them the moral way to do something, that doesn't always be things like peer pressure, their peer group using, that's makes a big difference. But with the tobacco industry, I don't know statistics, but I know that there was a measurable results when they started getting rid of advertisements that were hanging on the side of stores, and they got rid of access to certain sting operations when a retail store was selling underage stings, the person would be fired, the store would be fined.
Well, and Catherine mentioned, one of the things that happens, Vermont used part of their money really well for tobacco settlement money. We actually took out, when you talk about availability, one of the first things we took out were vending machines. I grew up in an area where you could go to any vending machine and get them. My store owner would sell them to me, regardless of my age. You know, so thinking about availability, we're going to need to figure out how we're going to keep our stores safe and keep them making sure that so you think about the marijuana products already, the CBD oil already. Where is it? Where's it located in the store? Where? Okay. So I can go into my local store. So this is where I want you to hear you can make a difference. And I can say, listen, I want to know why you've got this rack here of marijuana products right where kids can see it. If it's not to be sold to kids, then it needs to go behind the counter, which is what we learned with tobacco. And if enough people say that to your local store, I'm not going to shop here. If you don't change that, then you can make a difference. Well, I can't do that. Well, if you don't do it, who's going to?
I'm actually running for House of Representatives.
Oh!
In this district, I think against the two gentlemen that left probably, but there's other concerns I have. I think this is really rushed legislation for one, and I think that packaging plays a big part. If you look at some of the packaging on these edibles, they're super loud colors, and they look so much fun. Like, you see it, it's like a carnival. You know, kids respond to that. Kids respond to visual stimuli.
So there's the products that we haven't even seen. There's the butter, the brownies, the candy, the Coke, the ice cream, the advertising, the restaurants that are going to show how to cook with marijuana. It is beyond belief how big this is once the store gets open. And whether we can even shut it, I don't know. But I think your conversation, I think the more information we get, this young lady over here told me, you asked her, how do you know? Prove it. Prove it to me that this is the truth. Prove to me. And that's what I'm asking for all of us, is when we hear something and you say, show me the data. Show me that this is true. Because I've done some studies, and I don't know how you can argue with them all you want, but they're by some pretty reputable people. So thinking about that. So who else hasn't spoken yet? We've got a couple other tables that spoke. What about in the back, Michelle?
I just sat down here.
No, it's your table. Was there anything that you talked about that you have questions about or you want to talk to the group about?
Well, we were a little on the more mature side for age groups, and we were harkening back to this was similar to prohibition and how do they deal with alcohol then, and focusing on how do we limit access. It's like the law's not changed, you still can't use. So it's similar to alcohol in many ways, and we get stuck on the limiting access and how do you know how long it's in somebody's system and how impaired are they and what are the penalties.
Good questions. What's going to be hard with the access facilities, and you might want to chime in, Michelle, around prohibition, is if my neighbor is growing and he or she or they haven't locked it up. I'm not supposed to be able to see it. It's supposed to be locked. It's supposed to be in a secure facility. And anyone that comes over is not supposed to be able to get to it. Of course, I can get to it. I'm not supposed to have it out. Availability is key. We had some beautiful refreshments here tonight. I'm hoping that most of you partook in some of it. You did because it was here. It was available. Our kids are going to partake. Our young adults, our 20-somethings, 30-somethings are going to partake. So that's a great question. Some of my law enforcement is still here. I've been asking the question and no one's been able to answer it. If I'm growing 10 plants in my house, can you come into my house for no cause and determine how many plants I have? I'm not harming anybody, but I'm growing a whole bunch of them at my house. And you can't see them. But it's the law. So availability, I am concerned. If it's a pound, 5, 6 plants, it's going to be a lot of availability. Not everybody will throw it. I get that. But those that do are already gifting it away.
Sure, just along that conversation, one of my thoughts was if we need to get into a spot where it's only particular places you can purchase it, just like.
A liquor store?
Yeah. And the reason I'm saying, okay, so the reason I'm saying
That
that,
was discussed.
Joe, is it because it's very money right now, I think, for me, too. I mean, if it's, I'm not saying they will be able to get hold of it, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like it's firm enough to say very regulated. And we know your neighbor's growing. You know,
It's home consumption.
I mean, we really don't,
Next
we
year.
aren't really making moonshine anymore in the backwoods.
Yeah. True. Yep.
Just throw it out here.
Other tables, conversation, yes. And then the gentleman in the back.
And then what we talked about a little bit was, instead of saying, why is this 13-year-old smoking or drinking, sort of asking like, why what are they trying to treat? Like, what's going on behind the scenes? Because, you know, in our clinic, kids do not have to come in after age 5. And there's no reason why they would have to if they have parents that don't feel like they need a checkup, if they aren't playing a sport. There's nothing that says they are ever going to get seen, screened, ever, never. So I think it really has to happen at the school because they have to be here to some extent. And then, you know, we talked about a couple other things. One is sort of rewarding those kids that are, although it's hard to prove, but who aren't using somehow, so that you're not always sort of focusing on the ones who are. And that goes kind of hand in hand with the Iceland project, which I didn't know very much about, which is really putting money into the families so that they're spending time together, so that they're really bolstering youth activities, and just encouraging a lot more sort of extracurricular, sort of healthy behaviors that both fill the time and also add to confidence and resiliency and self-esteem and all those things that are also protective factors. But the problem is that I see is that people just don't vote that way. You know, the money doesn't, if something's going to get cut, it's usually the arts or the sports or the mental health screening.
Yeah.
And that's where, you know, that's a real problem.
Yep. Gentleman in the back.
You're concerned about 10 plants in the house and somebody come in and get it? That was happening before the law, correct? This problem is not a new problem.
Well, some of it is.
And perhaps there are some who might feel the law has exacerbated the use. While there may be others who say, you know, we're beginning very modestly to get some controls that might help, because in the end, everyone, regardless of their opinions, wants to make sure kids are protected. And that's what's probably paramount and most important to us. And whether the nurse or the doctor or the school teacher or the policeman or the fireman is using marijuana on the weekend or alcohol on the weekend, the question is on Monday when they show up, are they impaired?
Correct.
Because we don't want to infringe on their rights, which now, to some degree, are illegal with the marijuana.
No, more.
I'm worried that, please don't take this the wrong way, but I don't feel I've had this much preaching since I was last in church. And I'm just trying not to be too judgmental on people who might have different opinions, that's all.
Well, I agree.
Thank you.
I agree that this is a different drug than alcohol that you use on a Friday or Saturday. Just different in the safety system. It's going to require different solutions. And I have heard, because of the RAND report we had the day before, that 80,000 people in Vermont have been smoking and using marijuana. I heard that tossed around for 5 years now. And that's actually a small percentage, if that's an accurate statement. I wonder how they actually knew for sure that it was 80,000. But whether it's 80 or 100,000, whether it's 1% or 10%, we don't need to change laws for the minority when it's going to impact a lot of people. This isn't going to just impact our youth, it's going to impact our roadways, which we didn't talk a lot about, right? I know that our officers know. And it's a concern. So while I think that marijuana has been here, I would be the first to say that the drug itself has changed in the 30 years that I've been working with clients. It's laced with fentanyl. It's grown high potency in water. It's being extracted. So those that are using, perhaps, are using and selling a different kind of drug that's really genetically modified, which is pretty fascinating to me because our state doesn't necessarily believe in that. So I think the impacts are different. I think everybody is going to have to make a decision. And the difficulty with this drug is if you use it home, and you stay there, you have no children, and you don't impact them, and you don't impact me because you don't get in the car, that's your choice. But as you've been hearing, it's going to impact schools and how they teach because of parenting. It's going to impact nurses. It's going to impact our legislature. So I just think the other aspect of it, and this is true for many drugs, alcohol and food, meaning that impacts a lot of people too. This is a drug that we don't know a lot about, I think. And what we do know hasn't been great. I think it's got some good properties. I think the nurses are one. But I think we need to think about, I would have liked to have seen this conversation continue for another year before. Because we didn't do anything to those people that grew 10 plants. If you're sitting here and you were growing it, you're still growing it. And if you were smoking it, you're still smoking it. But availability is what it did do. And that's what those of us that are in prevention, mostly youth and adults, are concerned about this. You had your hand up, and I think we've got one more, and then we need to wrap up.
We talk about a lot of topics, range from how do you test for it. One of our questions was if law enforcement suspects someone is impaired, but it's not alcohol, it's marijuana, can they administer the same roadside impairment test as they do with alcohol? So we talked a lot about some of the practicalities, but I think that the overriding question and concern that we talk about is this law. They talk about marijuana as a gateway drug. I guess my question is this law a gateway law to broadening to edibles, to other aspects of marijuana legalization that will just build on this one particular law that was enacted? And I think that that's very frightening.
I can't answer that. I'm not a legislature or law. Do the police officers want to just respond to the DUI question about?
Yeah. So in the state of Vermont, currently we have approximately 55 DREs, drug recognition experts in the state. I'm one of them. But in law enforcement, we have tools available to screen for impairment. And that's what we teach all the regular road officers. And the state is trying to push as many officers through what we call the advanced roadside impairment class, which will help them better understand drug impairment besides alcohol. So if they're dealing with a person from a traffic stop or from a motor vehicle crash, they can sit down with the person and run through the standardized physical light testing and say, okay, this person, I believe, may be impaired on substance other than alcohol, and then they'll request the DRE to come in and do the evaluation. And from there, the drug evaluator makes their opinion, and then we run them just like a regular DUI at that point, and we ask for that person's blood. We try to get saliva testing in play as part of the marijuana bill, but that was turned down for a various number of reasons, one being cost. But we're trying to push to that still.
I have a question for you. Does the blood test tell an approximate time of when the person was using, or is it like analysis?
No, it's based on what is the active ingredient of the active drug, which is the THC, and its carboxy, which is the metabolite. That's what we look for. And the opinion is, and the courts have agreed with this, and it's what the officers observe impairment. So what do we see for impairment of the individual? Because a drug, that's why we are pushing from the law enforcement community of not having a standardized limit that you see with alcohol, 0.08. We say impairment's impairment. We don't want to have a nanogram amount of THC in a person's blood because we're seeing impairment at 1 nanogram.
Right.
So that's why we're saying it's impairment. Because you have to remember too, people who use marijuana may also be using alcohol and also may be using other drugs as well as at the same time. So we see polydrug.
So my follow-up question to you is if, say, you arrested someone for being impaired for marijuana, went before the judge, what would the burden of proof that they were using at that time that you stopped them be, aside from you saying he was impaired, which I'm not personally attacking you or anything, I'm just saying, if you're leaving it up to an officer to say that someone's impaired, there isn't really a burden of proof, in my opinion.
It's based on the drug evaluation that is conducted with that individual, which we look at the entire body systems to see what we're seeing. And then we correlate that to what is known.
And how well do you perform those same dexterity tests if you were under the influence of alcohol? They do the same exercise.
Yeah, it's the same.
If you show impairment with those, that's where they get the definition of impairment.
Because
is it usually the breathalyzer that holds up in court, the numbers that they quote?
no, because many times people refuse a breath sample.
Then it's an automatic DUI, right?
Not always, but it's what the observations of the officer of impairment and what the court goes by.
These are just questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, questions. But we look at the total body system is what we're looking at. So not only do we do standardized physical sobriety testing as part of the drug evaluation, we're also looking at their eyes, So cannabis, THC, may cause dilation of pupils, it may not. We're looking at blood pressure, body temperature, pulse rates throughout the 1 hour exam that is conducted on this individual. So it's a series of things that we look at. And what the officer observed while the person was driving, what they observed, what was said to them, and all these things are taken into account to inform their opinion.
Jenny, anything you follow up?
Does that help?
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you another question about this, to make sure everybody, because I think you guys do a great job, and so that process takes a while, right? It's going to be a painful process for somebody who gets pulled over, so it'll be a big enough deal that people are going to try and avoid that, however they do. But is that correct, that, if you suspect they're impaired, then they have to go to their blood test and you go with them, or it ties them up for quite a while, so it's not a simple, here's your ticket and move along, right? It's you guys are doing a great job making sure that these people realize the gravity of what their choices are.
It is a lengthy process, and you have to think that if there's not a drug evaluator in the immediate area, so we have territories that we have to cover. And so my area is not only just Lamoille County, but I also go to Caledonia, Washington, Orleans. I've been over to Bradford, over in Orange County even. So we have a big area to cover. That's why we're trying to get more and more DREs to handle the number of calls that we field throughout the calendar year. But yes, you're tying up law enforcement time frame because you figure the officer makes a traffic stop, it may be a half hour to an hour before the DRE gets there. You have then another hour of the evaluation time, and then you have to transport them to a hospital to have their blood drawn. So that's why we're pushing for the saliva testing that can be done right in the office. And there are controls, and we have lab testing of the saliva as well as an immediate presumptive positive or negative response on the machine.
And just that way, it just sucks for the person who gets pulled over. So hopefully, because that process is long, it'll maybe deter.
That should be a
No,
deterrent.
it's not, but
Not always.
Not always, but maybe.
I say not all, I don't know about all. Remember, they're impaired.
They're maybe not feeling it or seeing it. So I just want to be mindful of time. We have about 12 minutes left. And one of the things that we want to talk about as you get ready to leave, there's lots of questions I'm sure there's still unanswered. What do you need from either the prevention specialist or from Lamoille Valley who can help you? What do you think are some things that would be helpful in this dialogue, in this conversation moving forward? Because you might be sitting here thinking it's hopeless, there's nothing we can do, or you might be thinking there's some solutions. I see a hand, Catherine?
Well, I have two issues. One is, what they learned in Iceland was they had the worst drug and alcohol problem in all of Europe. And then they did, teach your kids to say no, it just didn't work for years or whatever. And so then they focused on getting the parents, educating the parents to be, so that the cohort of parents is stronger, peer group of parents is stronger than the peer group of kids. The kids, their philosophy is kids don't want to use drugs. It's up to parents to really create an environment that's healthy and to change the culture. So in Iceland, the culture was Saturday night, the dad gives his kids 2 beers and says, be safe, and that doesn't happen anymore. And so if there's a culture of around marijuana, in Vermont, we can change it. We can, that's one of the big things that Iceland teaches us. And I think that it would be really nice if we could get support for parents to learn that empowering thought that even if, like Iceland had high use rates, so there were high alcohol rates among parents, and yet they turned the battleship and they have the lowest alcohol drug use problem. 5 out of 6 rehab, not because they ran out of money, but because they didn't need them. It's just a phenomenal story.
And it's really important to read literature like that, to read our country. And we might read it and say, oh, well, we can't do that for our kids because of this, this, and this. As long as we look at why we need to do something, we probably ought to be able to. The question is, what can we take from that study? It's a huge study, a huge change in thinking about getting parents involved. And that's sort of what tonight is about. Yes, see your hand up. Now, the people that haven't spoke, yes.
Yeah, 2 thoughts on that. We never got notifications at home from our school about the activities that were happening in middle school. And if we had, that definitely would have prompted a conversation with our child who was here, who would have been interested. You're doing amazing work. People are working hard. The more you can get that information out and say, hey, schools, because you could have had more kids, I think, if more kids had known about that opportunity. And I also worry, I have a younger child, and we talked to him, he just turned 11, we talked to him about the craziest things that we have to do now. When we were growing up, we said, don't let a guy bring you a beer in college without making sure he doesn't drop something in it, right? The boundaries around keeping yourself safe were so much clearer, but now lollipops and pens and all the stuff you can't take from your friends. You can't take a gummy bear from your friends. But I wonder about the education that's going on through the schools for those little kids and whether we're equipped yet, whether there's curriculum, what's happening. Because I know, we just had a conversation a few months ago for the first time in our house, and we the kinder were fairly young, we didn't know much.
Exactly, and think about the statistic that Michelle put up. If the average age is 13, then a great part of our youth have already started using. We need to think about prevention being even younger.
So young.
Yeah. And helping parents understand. Because when I show these products to parents around the station, a lot of them have seen it, a lot of them haven't, they're pretty flabbergasted. And kids look at them all the time and say, it's no big deal, it's for everyone. Everybody's using it. So we're worlds apart from our kids, I think, sometimes. Yes?
So at our table with the municipal leaders, our conversation was around farmers markets, dispensing, zoning ordinances, and I think what we need, and I'm speaking for the table, but let me know if I'm off track, but I would say from our conversation, what we need from continued need from helping Lamoille Valley and prevention is to continue in the education of this law, and in particular, the difference between an ounce or less and an ounce or more, and what that means around dispensing and selling and giving and members who represent our town don't know.
It's interesting you mentioned the weight, because I asked one of my state trooper friends, he says, we're trying to get scales for all of our officers, so they can do a roadside weight, which, if you've got an edible, or you've got something other than that dry weight, you're gonna have a real hard time. So you're right, lots of great questions you just that I think communities need to be having. What's that?
I thought you couldn't have it in your car anyway.
It's supposed to be locked.
All right.
Either in the glove compartment, and if you don't have a glove compartment, it's supposed to be in back, locked, inaccessible. No children in your car. No use in the car, just like the open container law. No drinking, no use in the car. No. So if I'm driving, my passenger can't be token off. Yes.
Our counterparts down at the Mount Scottney Prevention Partnership, they created a really great, succinct document, and I apologize we don't have any here tonight, but they are on our Home in Lamoille Valley website, and it does kind of overview, like, what does this law mean? What does that look like? So there's also this flow chart.
Yep, and then they also put together this flow chart that's also on the website that's kind of clear, having the dialogue with youth.
I'll email those out to you when we do the survey next week as well. So.
Other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Yes. My name is Paul Finnerty. I'm with the great conversation. Happy to be here tonight. But there is one piece that is widely misunderstood about the statute.
Okay.
Which is that although the legislature apparently intended to restrict tenants' ability to cultivate by requiring the landlord to give permission.
Correct.
What the statute actually says is that you can only grow on property that you own or with the written permission of the person in lawful possession. So the person in lawful possession is the tenant. So although the statute says that it doesn't prohibit, and there's a handout for all landlords here, it doesn't prohibit landlords from putting a no cultivation or no use clause in their rental agreements. If you're relying on that particular language in the statute to protect the apartment owner or to restrict the options available to the tenant, it really doesn't do that.
So they do need to put it in a addendum then.
Even if they do.
And have them sign. That's important.
Thank you.
I guess they didn't talk to us, perhaps, that legal piece, to make sure it was all fit in there. And I think there's going to be lots of pieces like that that are going to come up, you know, that are going to be asked. I saw two hands and then we're going to wrap up. Two quick comments, questions?
I can't get out of my mind what you were talking about, the CBD oil, and like my employee walking down to get a coffee with it, isn't it? 2-3 times a day, but it's not, what's in it? And how can we regulate that?
Great question. Legislators maybe need to look at that as well.
Yeah.
We don't know what's in it. At least I don't from how quickly it's, we don't.
Yeah.
Does it have THC? Doesn't?
Yeah.
What's in it? I don't know.
Because I often wonder, like,
Great question. Impairment.
Yeah.
Like black apples, little maple sticks, tea with CBD, right at the expense.
Yeah, they have them at the end of my store.
Yeah,
So one of the things, again, I always question, if you've got a local store that's selling something, you can ask the owner what's in it, where you buy it, tell me the company. You can ask those kinds of years ago, I went into my local store and they were selling individual cigarettes, and I knew that was actually illegal. And I asked them about that, and they said, well, when the packages break, we just sell them. And I said, you do know that's illegal? And he looked at me and said, no, I didn't. I said, well, it is. And if I'd like to see them gone, and if you don't, I can report you. I'm trying to, it's hard to do sometimes, but asking the questions of where they get it, I think is how we're going to educate the issue. I want to close with this. I went to a conference years ago in California, and this guy walked through the audience, and there was 1,000 people there, and he looked around and he said, In my culture, we don't say hi. We don't say hello, how are you? We say, how are the children? How are the children? And I sat in that room and I cried. Because our kids were drinking and smoking and dying at a higher rate than most places. But it doesn't make any difference to me about rate. I look at the kids in this room and I talk to this young lady, and I think she has the right to grow up in a safe environment and not have to make some choices at 12 years old that I don't think are easy to make, especially when we now know that the brain is not completely formed. And think about it. How many of you maybe made a decision before you were 25 or 26 you wish you hadn't made? We all do. And after that. But as our brain forms, hopefully we gather information, and that's what I want our youth to be, is good critical thinkers. I want our adults to be good critical thinkers. I want to find out, and I've got a great book I want you to read, about finding information and challenging what you read. When you see something in the paper and it's a headline that CBD takes care of everything, or not just marijuana, but anything, I think if we teach our young and our adults good critical thinking skills, we're going to be asking what this young lady says, prove it to me. Show me the data. Show me how you know that. Why should I do that? Do I need to do that? Yeah, I'm feeling this, but do I need to do anything about it? What can I do? I think when we do that, when we give everyone the right and the ability to grow here in Vermont, then we're doing what's right for all Vermont. And to me, that's the Vermont way. You have a right to do what you want in your house. This isn't just about you. This is a big law. I can't thank you enough for coming tonight and being willing to